This is our material pricing strategies webinar. We've been getting a lot of input and, like Derek said, questions and feedback and challenges with the material pricing in the industry. I've been around this industry for over 25 years. I've seen some pretty significant pricing movement, but not like we've seen over this last several months, going back into even last year. So we're going to start with just some basic quick terminology, so when we talk about some of these things, you'll know what we're referring to. The trade price, when we use that term, we're talking about the list price, the price that's published by the manufacturer. So whether it's Hubbell or Leviton or Square D or any of the manufacturers, they all publish what we call the trade price, or you might call it the MSRP price. It's just a list price. And sometimes in the industry, it's called column 3, if you're familiar with some of the price books, or the end column. And what it really is suggested wholesale list price. And again, the manufacturers determine the trade price. Now in Epic and and the electrical bid manager program, we refer to what we call the target price. The target price is actually based on a national average cost. Now we're going to talk about some other strategies related to that, but we monitor suppliers all over the country, and we'll talk about some of the differences there. And some people also call that the market price, but it's a national average, and we typically build a little bit of cushion into that. Now we talk about discounts. The target price is typically a discounted price from the trade price. So depending on the product, it might be a 30% discount from the trade price. Some discounts are very specific to the item. Some are for an entire group of items. So a manufacturer's wiring devices, we may be able to put a 30% discount on all their switches. Other times we have to go in and put discounts on specific items. So it's a mix of specific discounts applied to specific individual items and also to groups of items. Okay, another terminology we use quite a bit is UPC numbers. UPCs are the barcodes that you see on the packaging and pretty much everything we buy these days. Right now in the electrical industry, we're using an 11-digit UPC number. I think there's going to be some changes in that if they're not already happening, but it's an 11-digit number that is on every item in the industry. Okay, so let's talk about some of the common strategies with pricing, some of the pros and cons with those. The first strategy is to trust your supplier to give you the best pricing. So one of the obvious advantages to that is that you have an existing relationship with the supplier, and a lot of that's based on them giving you competitive pricing over the years, or even just recently, whatever the case is. So that's an important aspect of trusting your suppliers to give you good pricing. They have known reliability with you. They know enough about you and your business to give you reliable pricing. They tend to be consistent and reliable. You know the quality of their service, so you're just not going out there in the street and asking for prices from a half a dozen suppliers you don't know if they can deliver in terms of service. So working with existing suppliers it's got a benefit. And then they can also account for local pricing, which might be volatile on critical items. So if there are shortages in your particular area, and you can rely on them to take that into account when they give you pricing. Now, the disadvantage of just trusting your supplier to give you the best prices is that it's tedious to review those prices when you get them. And there's no easy way to compare. You don't know if that item that they just gave you a price of $10 on is available from somebody else for $5 without doing comparison one by one. So comparing pricing is tedious, and that's one of the disadvantages of just relying on your supplier, is there's no easy way to make sure you've got a good price. You're also taking the risk that they may be quoting you inferior quality. A lot of products in the industry are relatively, commodity type things. THHN wire is THHN wire, but when you get into fittings and boxes and a lot of the other products, the quality can vary, and just because they're giving you a price, you want to make sure that the quality that you're comparing to another supplier is similar, and it won't always be. The other disadvantage of just trusting your supplier to give you the best pricing is they may take advantage of your relationship with them. They may start making the assumption that you're not checking pricing carefully, and that they can get a little bit higher margin on some of the materials they're selling you. Okay, so that's some of the pros and cons on the first strategy, which is just to trust your supplier to give you good pricing. Second strategy is to send out a material list for the pricing on all jobs. Send, 2 or 3 of your suppliers the complete material list or part of the material list for the job, and ask them to give you pricing on that list of material. Now, one of the benefits of that is you can break the job up into different areas, what we call phases in EBM. And other people might call it a cost code, but a typical phase or a typical breakdown would be the feeder wire versus the branch wire versus the feeder conduit, the underground conduit, the branch conduit. EBM automatically breaks up the job into those different categories, and you can send the supplier a bill of material either for the entire job or just a particular area that you're ready to start getting pricing and availability on. And again, that's typically an easy thing to generate. If you've done the estimate, you can just go into the program and generate that list broken out into those different categories or for the whole job. So it's easy to produce a bill of material if you're using a program like Electrical Bid Manager to do your estimate. Another advantage, I guess, is that the supplier, if you're giving him a list of materials that are relatively generic, he can give you, it's his discretion to give you brands with the best pricing. So if he gets better pricing on Leviton devices versus Hubble versus P&S, he can use his discretion to give you the best pricing and give you the most competitive pricing. I think just the simple act of sending him a material list puts him on notice that you're ready to buy and you're ready to compare pricing. So it's a good way just to initiate the whole pricing and negotiating part of buying out a job or buying part of a job. Again, one of the disadvantages here is it's tedious. It's tedious to review the pricing they send you. And again, there's no easy way to compare from one supplier to another. And then you've got the issue with quality again. So it's pretty much the same disadvantages of sending out a price list as it is just to rely on them. Now, here's what a lot of people do. I can guarantee if I talk to 10 contractors a day that they would tell me that they check their prices on the invoice when they get them. That's just part of being a good business person. And that does give you the opportunity to identify pricing mistakes. You may be able just to identify a bad price because it's way out of whack. With a little bit of experience, you can get pretty good at catching some of those things. You also might be able to identify items that are being billed to their incorrect job. Typically, when you buy materials with the wholesaler, you tell them what job it's for, and if you see things come up on the wrong on the invoice that are for the wrong job, you can get that fixed before it gets into your job costing system. Again, it lets them know you're comparing pricing. When you call them up and say that item is too much, then they're on notice that you're comparing pricing and checking the pricing on what you're being invoiced for. It's always best to catch those mistakes before you pay the invoice. It's a lot easier for you and the supplier to make a correction before you pay the invoice. After the fact, it's a lot more work for both of you to go back and fix an incorrect price. The whole disadvantage here of checking the pricing, it's putting all of the burden on your back as a contractor to catch the mistakes. So it's, it does create a lot of the burden of proof, if you will, puts it on the contractor versus the supplier to catch those mistakes. They're obviously not going to report mistakes, especially if they're in their favor. And this whole process is time consuming. And every time you find a mistake, you have to send them some kind of communication or call them or let them know that there's a mistake on the invoice, and it takes time to correct it. A lot easier before you pay the invoice than it is after, but in either case, it takes time to do all that. So one of the strategies that people have gone to over the years is using standardized or published pricing. The prices I talked about earlier, the trade price, the published price. Unfortunately, that's, one of the advantages of using that is though those prices are often appropriate for change orders or service work. So a lot of people do use the trade price for the standard price, the published price for change orders and for service work. The advantage there is that the customer can verify those prices. If you send them a change order and they can verify that the list price on that item is whatever you charged them, it gives it a sense of credibility. For you as the contractor, it builds in profit because you're going to typically buy at below those trade prices. And just a quick little aside here, in all the years we've been monitoring pricing, you'd be surprised how many times contractors get charged the trade price or higher than that just because they're not checking, they're not catching those mistakes, catching those prices that are too high. Now, if you do use the trade price, even for change orders or service work, you do risk the possibility of customers objecting to those higher prices. It's usually the visible items that they're going to catch and react to. We, in addition to our estimating program, we sell a billing program, and I always tell people, to be careful with the very visible items. Those items the customer can check a price on at Home Depot, but keep in mind that probably 95% of the things that you're billing them for, they're not really knowledgeable as to what they are. And of course, some customers are more knowledgeable than others, but if you do charge the standard price, you do have that issue to deal with the more knowledgeable customers and the more visible items. And again, those trade prices aren't really realistic for competitive bidding. They're appropriate, they're useful for change orders and service work, but not really for competitive bidding. You'd price yourself out of the job, even in today's market, which is pretty busy and good profit margins are out there. We still got to be competitive. Oops, didn't mean to do that. Okay, so really the best solution, the best strategy to all of this is to get, one of the things that's really going to help you is to get electronic pricing from your local distributors. You can get that in a couple different formats, which we're going to actually talk about and show you later, but you can get your local supplier, whether it's a gray bar, whether it's somebody else. We're going to talk about the two different ways to get that, but you can get, in addition to the target price in Epic and the trade price in Epic, you can get your local supplier's pricing incorporated into your estimating system. That assures you of the accuracy of your local pricing. So if there are variations from one supplier to another, or even one area of the country to another, the suppliers will, if you get an electronic pricing, it's going to be accounted for in that price that you get. Okay. Now, it is easy if you're getting electronic pricing again from one of your local distributors to compare that to the target price. And that tells you a good benchmark of whether or not you're getting a good price. If you just take that price of $10 and don't know that the average price is $5, you're kind of at a disadvantage. The whole strategy of getting good pricing is to have a base of comparison. And we can even in EBM allow you to compare from one supplier to another and to the target price all at the same time. We'll get to a little quick demonstration of that later. Now, one of the advantages of getting electronic pricing from more than one supplier is that they may object to you cherry picking. You know, you may find that one supplier's got good pricing on conduit, another's got a good pricing on boxes, another's got a good pricing on devices. Some suppliers will object to you cherry picking and buying certain products from one supplier and certain products from another. Again, that's something you can typically you'll typically have to work out with your suppliers, but it is something they may object to. Okay, let's talk about some myths and facts in this whole pricing issue, some misconceptions. One is that prices don't change very often. That is, up until this last several months, I think a lot of people just thought, well, the prices just don't change very often. Why do I need to worry about it? Well, we've all seen that change over the last several months, but even during stable times, if you will, prices are still changing all the time. They may be smaller percentages, they may be not as frequent, but they do change very often. Here's a little graph that kind of gives you an idea of the number of price changes over the last year. This goes back to the second quarter of 2019. So you can see that just during a typical quarter, there's well over 100,000 changes.
That's
during
a million,
the fourth quarter. Well, that's a million. Sorry, yeah. Thank you. Extra zero in there. Yeah, 1 million prices that changed in that second quarter. About 1.5 million items that changed in the second quarter of 2019. Up to the fourth quarter of 2020, it was getting up to close to 3 million price changes in a quarter. Now that's a lot of activity. You can't do that. You can't keep a handle on that manually. Obviously, you've got to have some kind of a pricing service to really keep a good handle on that. So the myth that prices don't change very often is not true. Even if the price changes are small, they're always happening. Pricing for your local distributor is competitive. You know, that's an assumption you have to be careful with. They make mistakes. Sometimes they charge you the wrong unit of measure. They charge you per foot instead of per 100 feet. They make mistakes all the time. And a lot of the time, they're only going to be competitive if they're forced to negotiate. Unless they know, like I said earlier, that you're comparing pricing to other suppliers, that you're even comparing to the national average, then they will take advantage of that. So copper pricing, the myth is that copper pricing is entirely tied to the commodity market. MC cable and Romex less so than THHN. Now, there is obviously ultimately a tie between the cost of copper and the cost of wire, but it's not as direct as you might think. During volatile times, that spread is really high. Right now, we see a huge spread on the commodities like we've never seen before, quite honestly. The other thing that comes into play here is that some suppliers price according to what they bought things for, or what, you know, they've got an ongoing, they may have made a commitment to their suppliers, to the manufacturers to buy things, and they're still pricing on those prices they negotiated way back when. So some suppliers will not pass on the cost until their cost goes up. Others will price to the current market. So if their perception is that most of the other suppliers are raising their prices on certain things, and then they'll respond to that. Other suppliers will base more on what their cost is on their inventory. So it's kind of a mixed bag, and it could even be a mixed bag within the supplier too. It may be certain items they mark up from their cost. Certain items they try to price according to the industry. This is one of my favorites. The pricing is regional. Almost everybody assumes that the prices in their part of the country are different than somewhere else. For the most part, we don't find that's really true. We do find huge variations. It could be across the street though. Across town, the supplier's got significantly different pricing. That's probably much more common. Again, we monitor suppliers all over the country, and we really don't see a regional aspect to it. We do see differences from supplier to supplier, absolutely. The one exception to that is if you're in a remote area, then your prices will be higher because you're in an area where there's only one supplier for 200-mile radius, and there's a lot more cost in doing business. I was just working with a contractor up in, not only was he in Alaska, he was in a remote part of Alaska. He was 600 miles from Anchorage. His prices were significantly higher than most other electrical contractors, even though he did a pretty good volume. He was still, he has to pay for that. The other assumption people make, I think a little bit overstated, is that pricing is dependent entirely on your volume. That's not necessarily true. Very large quantities, obviously, expensive items get better discounts, but you'd be surprised. There's a lot of discount opportunities just in your standard everyday purchases. Again, you've got to be on top of it. You've got to be aware of where the actual prices can be. Can't let your suppliers take advantage of you. But you don't have to have a 500-man shop to get the very best prices. A lot of those shops, buy in small quantities, and they'll spread it around with different suppliers. So they're not necessarily, going to get great quantity volume discounts. It's a little bit of a mixed thing. You see the same thing, if you go to Home Depot. I can walk into Home Depot this afternoon and buy Romex at as good or a better price than a large electrical shop would buy it from their wholesaler. That's the whole idea of some of these superstores, is that they pass on those discounts. Even though you're making little purchases, they look at a lot of little purchases as the opportunity to get some volume. So think of it like that. Your supplier is kind of like a Home Depot. He's buying in volume. He gets a good price, but then whether you purchase 100 feet of pipe at a time or 10,000 feet of pipe at a time won't necessarily affect the pricing drastically. Again, these are all kind of subjective things. There's not a lot of absolute patterns or facts about pricing. There's exceptions to everything. There's gray areas for everything. Just trying to give you a little bit of input on some of the things that we found that are not as black and white as you may have been led to believe over the years. So the importance of a pricing service is it keeps your prices up to date. I think we've seen that more than ever in our business of the last year and a half, is that prices have been hard to keep a handle on, so you need to keep them up to date, and that's what a pricing service does for you. It gives you a benchmark. I think that's so important. If you don't know what the average price is, how can you negotiate with your supplier without actually checking with other suppliers, which is time consuming? You've got to have a benchmark. So we have two primary ways to create that benchmark with Electrical Bid Manager. First of all, we provide the target price, and then you can compare the target price to a service, a third-party company that offers NetPricer, or you can also do custom pricing. And I'm going to try to explain those as simply and quickly as I can. If you're familiar with NetPricer, NetPricer is a service that you set up a one-to-one relationship with a supplier that offers NetPricer. Most of them do. And what happens is you take your job, or part of the job, but usually it's the entire job, and you send it to them electronically. And they come back over the internet right away, and they give you pricing on the items that they've got in their inventory. Now, I'm going to flip over to EBM and just give you a couple little examples. So here's just a sample commercial job I did in EBM, and right now it's using the target price. Whoops. So up here on the price column, I've chosen target. And when I run the report, everything's plugged in at the Epic target price. So half-inch EMT is at $70.27 per 100. That's pretty crazy. Now, the option with NetPricer works this way. You would change it here where it says use NetPricer price, and you would have a list of your suppliers here. I just have one as an example. And I'm going to save this under a different name. Just going to call it NetPricer example. Now what it does here, it says, do you want to replace this? It offers you the opportunity here to refresh your NetPricer prices, because you might have done this 10 minutes ago, or you might have done it 10 months ago. So I'm going to say refresh the prices. So this is going out to the NetPricer server, which is connected to that supplier. And it comes back and it tells me there were 16 items here that didn't get priced by the supplier. It'll tell us which one of those are on this report here. But everything else, I think it's about 80 to 90% of these items are priced by NetPricer. So now you've got the NetPricer prices in here. Okay. Now the other option we have is what we call custom pricing. Custom pricing works directly through Epic. And here's an example in this column here that I've labeled Gray Bar, Florida 921. These items that are in blue are prices that came through custom pricing. Now, the way custom pricing works is you set up a relationship with the supplier, and they send you a price file, whatever period, whatever interval you agree with them to. But most of them do it once a month. So you'll download that into Epic, and then when you look up that item in Epic, you'll see in blue the supplier's pricing. You can see these are consistently just a little below the target price, which is good. And when you run your estimate, you have the option to use that same price column. So I'll flip back there. So I'm going to change it from target to that supplier. I'm going to uncheck NetPricer. And I'm going to save that under. So right now I'm running individual reports. I ran one with the target price. I ran one with the NetPricer supplier, and now I'm running one with the Gray Bar pricing through custom pricing. So at this point, other than stacking those reports side by side, it's kind of hard to compare one to another, but we have a tool for that. It's called the price comparison. I got to go back one quick step here and set this to target. And now when I go to the price comparison, it's going to compare target to my custom price from Gray Bar and my NetPricer price to this supplier somewhere in Maryland. So I'm going to hit price comparison. I don't need to refresh it because I just did it. So now it gives me 3 different price levels. This is a good example here, 4-inch PVC. And that item is in purple because Gray Bar in Florida has the best price on that. The price from the supplier in Maryland is $829 per 100. The target price was kind of right in the middle, $791. That's kind of where you expect, where you'd want the target price to be. But you can see on those PVC items, my supplier in Florida has good pricing. Now if I go, and actually this particular supplier doesn't have very many that are low, my Maryland supplier. So if I come down here to the bottom, I'm going to see that his total pricing is $48,000 for the job. My Gray Bar supplier is at $42,500 for all the materials. Target would have been at $44,600. Now at this point, I have the option to use that particular supplier's pricing, or I can cherry pick it. I can hit lowest overall, and that's the price it'll use in my bid. Now that's kind of risky, obviously. It may not be feasible, but that's up to you. You can tell it to do the lowest overall and then work that out when you actually go to buy materials. A lot of the time with suppliers, it's a matter of telling them that somebody else has a better price, and that gives them the the initiative to sharpen their pencil and to give you better pricing. So I think it's a great comparison tool. We can help you set it up. There is a monthly charge for NetPricer. Typically with the custom pricing, they don't charge you, they just send you a file once a month, and they'll email it to you. So those are some great benchmarking tools. And you can use those in your estimating or your billing. I'm going to finish up with just a couple of little graphs here with some changes in the pricing. Each of these graphs shows you the trade price. That's the blue one. That's the published price. And it shows you the target price. So this is number 12 THHN copper. This goes back just to June of last year up to just recently. It's more than doubled in price. So that's significant, obviously. I don't know, again, that you see that very often historically. You do see some leveling off here. Over the last 3 months, we have seen some leveling off on a lot of these commodities that were going crazy. Let's go to the next one. This is 4/0 wire. Same kind of thing, same roughly, not quite as much percentage change in the copper wire. This is MC cable. I think this is kind of interesting. MC cable held pretty strong and level up until about the middle of this year. And then just recently, MC cable has gone up quite a bit. So now it's up above about 60% above where it was a little over a year ago. But if you see, that price was pretty flat up until this last couple months, and it shot up. This is Romex. Same kind of thing. It held pretty level until just about 2 months ago. It started to go up. It's up 120% from June of last year. EMT shot way up back in March of this year. By the end of March, it was way up to here. And now it's back down a little bit, but it's still over 90, almost 90% above where it was in June of last year. Here's our PVC, probably one of the ones that's changed, and definitely one of the ones that's changed the most over the last year plus. You can see that 3/4 inch PVC is up 220%. I don't think I've got any numbers here on the large PVC price conduit, but I think it's even a more dramatic increase. The 4-inch square boxes are, up less than 10% over the last year. I'm not sure that really makes sense because they're made out of steel, but probably when it comes down to it, the cost of manufacturing the box is more significant than the actual cost of the raw materials. So they're just up a little bit. You're going to see the same thing on wiring devices, pretty much flat. Even though some of the raw materials that go into making up the receptacles have gone up, the target prices remain pretty constant. Go ahead with the questions.
Okay. Robert says, I've been manually modifying my database in EBM. If I subscribe to Epic, what happens to my manual entries?
You got two options. You can go to individual items and tell them you don't want them updated by Epic. If you do that, Epic will. If you don't do that, Epic will update them. So it assumes, unless you tell it otherwise, that you want to use Epic's prices and other than the ones you're putting in there. And a lot of people use a combination of both. They feel like they've got the time and the ability to monitor some of the more common items, and then they use Epic for all the other stuff, all of the other 1.5 million items that are out there to purchase. That's a good strategy.
Yeah, I think that's you could email support at visioninfosoft.com or go to our support page and fill out a form to create a support case with us, and our support staff can kind of step you through that as well. Because
right.
I don't know, it's kind of beyond the scope of this webinar probably, but the whole radio buttons on discount and target, and if the radio button on the item is set to discount, then Epic will update that. But if it's set to target and you've manually entered a target price, then Epic won't touch that.
That's correct.
But
Yeah,
I think
that's the kind of thing you definitely want to call in, and we'll go over that in a little more detail with you.
right, and support might have a short video that they could send you to kind of allow you to go over it at your own pace. The next question, Bud asks, is the comparison pricing tool part of NetPricer? I also just wanted to mention real quick that we have a product that is called Epic NetPricer that includes both Epic's database and target price, as well as the NetPricer service. They're kind of tied together in that product. Or if you're an existing Epic customer, you can add on NetPricer. But you want to answer this question, Brian?
What was the question again?
Well, the question is the comparison pricing tool part of NetPricer? And let me try
No,
to answer that actually. Yeah, no, it's actually part
part
of
of EVM.
EBM, and you can use the NetPricer price as part of the comparison, and you can use our target price from Epic, which is the real benefit there, is being able to compare the benchmark target price to your supplier's price. Or as Brian showed earlier, and you can review in the video when you get it via email, you can do a custom price file that like a delimited file that gets sent by your supplier directly to you, like via email, and you can import that into Epic, which then gets fed into the comparison table.
The other thing that Epic gives you in that combination, either with NetPricer or with custom pricing, is that Epic will fill in a price on the things that your supplier doesn't provide. So you saw that little job we did. There were 16 items. Now that was, I think it was only about 10% of the items, maybe 15% of the items that were in that little bid. But Epic will then default, EVM will then default to use Epic's target price. So you still got a realistic, viable number that it's plugging in, even if the supplier doesn't give you pricing on that.
Yeah, NetPricer usually has pretty good coverage, but there's always those items that for some reason it's like, well, why was my supplier not pricing that by NetPricer? And you can talk to your supplier about that as well, and maybe they could fix that on their end. That's something that we recommend, but otherwise our Epic target price is used and saves you a lot of time.